Welcome in, everybody, to Warm Weather Fans. For the first time ever, it's just me and Matt. My name is Zeke Palermo. I'm joined by Matt Miguez today. No Brian Stone. Someone hit a transformer outside of his house, so he's also out of power. But I think he's doing what you and I have both done this year, Matt, and that is just dodge difficult questions about his team.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. That's a well thought out excuse. Which I mean, kudos to him. I would have never come up with somebody hit a transformer outside of my house. So I mean, look, good for him.
No, your excuses are usually random ailments that pop up half an
Yeah,
hour before our recording. Got caught up at the soup kitchen, so it's a little more
yeah,
dog ate my homework.
yeah.
Brian will
I'm
have
a little more traditional. Brian's quite elaborate.
yeah, so welcome in everybody to Warm Weather Fans. We had a really exciting week in the Sun Belt last week. Two major upsets. Everything else went relatively according to plan. And I guess we'll go ahead and jump into it, Matt, unless you have anything else to talk about the game that we alluded to, what we think Brian might be dodging talking about. And it was Georgia Southern getting absolutely walked by Old Dominion. They played on Thursday. Southern, Brian and I had spoken about them maybe being the best team in the East after their win over James Madison, and they get walked 47-19 to Old Dominion. Matt, did you watch any of this game over the Thursday night
I
football?
I did,
Mm-hmm.
and my big takeaway is where the hell did this Old Dominion team come from?
Well, for one, it's obviously Colton Joseph, right? I mean, he's like Ricky Ronnie's Jalen Rayner. Is a comparison that we made last week. Um, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how many more of these games Old Dominion is going to have to win before we start giving them their flowers. Because again, I don't know if I'm fully convinced about this team. They beat Texas State last week, or I suppose beat Southern last week. The week before that, they beat Texas State, and the week before that, it was Georgia State. But I'm still unconvinced. I'm still under the impression that this is the same Old Dominion team that just kind of picks points out of a hat. What do you think about Colton Joseph? Is he the guy moving forward? How long do you think he stays at Old Dominion before he gets pulled away?
Look, I mean, for the time being, I think he has to be the guy,
Right.
because the way that their offense has just flipped since he's taken over. I mean, already 900 yards, 8 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. His rushing numbers are impressive as well. I mean, he's been their offense, and they've won 3 straight games with him under center. I mean, already their second leading rusher with 412 yards on the ground. So in a handful of games, he's got almost 1,300 yards of total offense, 14 touchdowns, and only 2 interceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy's playing out of his mind. Um, and what's going to be interesting is when you look at the rest of their schedule. I think we can agree that the toughest game they play is James Madison,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty comparable to a Texas State, right?
Thereabouts,
Um,
sure.
I don't want to use the distributive property, but like I feel like if you can beat Texas State, you can beat James Madison. I mean, we're looking at a Old Dominion team that could very well go 7-5,
Mm-hmm.
and this season that might be enough to play for a Sun Belt championship out of the East Division.
Sure. You're talking about the commutative property.
That's what I meant.
To cup check you there. Um,
Smart guy.
my question also for you, Matt, is because your team, Louisiana, had a guy like Jalen Rayner and now like Colton Joseph, where they just kind of show up and are obviously the best quarterback on the roster, but then also for several weeks in a row uh looks like he's the best rusher on the team. How sustainable is that? Like, is Colton Joseph, is a game plan for these final 3 games against James Madison, Marshall, Arkansas State, App State, 4 games rather? Is that something they can game plan around? Like, what did you think when you guys had someone like that?
It's something that you can game plan for, certainly, but if you, and I'm assuming you're talking from the defensive perspective.
I'm talking really offensively. Like, is this something that you can like? Can you? Is it? Are you building for long-term success if you're counting on your quarterback leading you in rushing yards? If you're counting on 90 on 11 carries or the like from your quarterback, is that sustainable? Is that like a winning game plan?
For the rest of this year, certainly.
Sure,
But bigger picture, no, probably not. Because I mean, you give teams an off season to break down film on opponents, they're going to figure out a game plan to kind of control that. So obviously, you'd have to hit the transfer portal or recruiting to get a better running back. But for the way the roster is currently constructed in 2024, no doubt it's a winning formula.
sure,
You saw it with the Cajuns last year. They finished 6-7, but those 3, 4, 5 games that Zion Chris played for you were magic.
mm-hmm.
Um, and now plays every other game at Houston. But it's one of those things where that extra wrinkle in the offense. It's very similar to what the Saints do with Taysom Hill.
Mm-hmm.
That extra wrinkle to the offense, even if he's not getting the football, or keeping the football, I should say, a defender has to account for him,
Sure,
which opens up so much of the field for you, whether you're giving it to your running back or if Colton Joseph's going to decide to throw it. So it's definitely a winning formula against the 4 opponents they have coming up.
sure. And then one more thing about this game. This would have been a Brian question. I wish he was here to answer this. JC French got pulled in this game for Dexter Williams. I was at the Southern game 2 weeks ago over the win against James Madison, and there was a lot of conversation going around me from both the spectator, like general admission, and then I also hung out in the student section for a little bit. There was an attitude of wanting Dexter Williams and wanting this change. I wasn't a big supporter of it. I believe you can't. I mean, you remember Davis Brin. We remember Kyle Van Treese. Like, senior one-off transfer quarterbacks isn't the key to success for Southern as a program. And I don't know. I'll leave the complaining for Matt or for Brian rather next week. But this shakes up how I view the Sun Belt, the East. I think James Madison is back to my top team in the East. What does your power ranking look like out there?
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. I'm certainly not going to rule out Georgia Southern
Sure.
or even Old Dominion. Obviously, with the way that they've been playing, I don't think App is in a position where they can make a run back at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Coastal's out of it as well. Georgia State, no offense,
Mm-hmm.
haven't won a conference
Yeah.
game. They're certainly out of it.
Right.
So I mean, and then you can't forget about Marshall, which is kind of crazy that we're sitting here talking about it. But I mean, they're 2-1 in the Sun Belt. They're only a game out of that tie for first. So if they could pick up a win over Old Dominion this weekend, or next weekend, I should say, you could be looking at a different, a way different Sun Belt East than we're even looking at right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this puts Georgia Southern at 3-1 in conference. It is tied with Old Dominion at 3-1. The Sunbelt website lists Georgia Southern on top, breaking that tie. I would imagine because they have the better overall record, but
Correct.
if Old Dominion has the head-to-head, I don't know how that will shake out at the end of the year. Then we go to our regular slate of games. I won't spend a ton of time on this one because I think it was an embarrassing performance from Georgia State. Georgia State loses to App 33-26. This is the worst App team we've seen in a long time. This was also their first game back in Boone since the Hurricanes, so certainly some positive mojo from there. Georgia State's problem here was that they couldn't convert on third down. The team was 1 of 8, I believe, on third downs. Uh, Between last game and this, they made the official switch at quarterback from Christian Valaire to Zach Gibson. I was unimpressed by Zach Gibson, or unimpressed by that move. Part of the third down struggles in this game were because he took 3 sacks on third down. Again, out of only 8 opportunities, he took a sack on 3 third downs. And overall, I thought this was a relatively embarrassing performance, but it confirmed what we knew. Georgia State's defense sucks. App is, not the basement dweller that, they could have maybe been looked at, especially after the loss to Marshall, after the 0-3 start to the conference season. Did you get to watch any of this game, Matt?
No, I didn't.
Sure.
But just, looking at the way the game kind of transpired, I mean, it's a 25-23 game going into the fourth quarter. Georgia Southern actually took the lead with 6.5 left.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you, in those final 6.5 minutes, I see App State went on a 5-minute scoring drive to take what would end up being the 33-26 win. But so I guess I'll pose the question in that final 2 minutes where Georgia State got the ball with an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What happened?
4 downs, and they went out. It was an incompletion into like a medium incompletion that set up third and I think under 3. And then Zach Gibson took a sack. Fourth down came up through an incompletion. Game was over. That again, you look at that drive from App State was just like the I don't know. You couldn't draw up a 4-minute drive better than they did. They went 10 plays, 75 yards, almost took 5 whole minutes. Late in the game, it was a good drive. And even with the lead late, I don't think I saw Georgia State get a real good stop that wasn't off of a turnover. They forced a fumble, and that's kind of how they got the field goal late at the end of the game. This ultimately was poor defense got bailed out by App State's inability to capitalize on every drive. I don't know. I've been loud that I'm not too pressed about this season. I'm unimpressed by the decision to go to Zach Gibson. I understand Christian Valaire wasn't the guy. I'd like them to use Kyle Lau. Kyle Lau got a couple snaps. It may just have been one, but he got at least one snap late in the game. He's more mobile than both Valaire and Gibson, and the best part is that he's younger. In a season that's a wash. I don't really understand starting a senior in Gibson, a guy that won't be there. That brings Georgia State to 0-4 in conference. This season is a wash. They're 2-5, lost their last 4. App State gets their first conference win. They are 1-3, 3-4 overall in the conference. It is unlikely, but they still have, I suppose, a breath in the conference race out of the East. I wouldn't hold your breath. This one also not terribly interesting. James Madison returns to form with a 32-15 win over Southern Miss. Southern Miss actually took an early lead in this game, but it did not last long. They went up 3-0, but got outscored 32-12 the rest of the game. For me, against James Madison, it was just good to see them lay the hammer. I thought they got embarrassed by Southern 2 weeks ago. And I think this was a good enough performance. As I said, when we talked about the Southern game, this is a good enough performance for me to want to slot them back top of my Eastern Division power rankings.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a good performance for them to kind of dominate, flex their muscle. Petaway had a good game on the ground with 119 yards and a touchdown. And look, that second quarter really, kind of made the difference, right? It was 17-9 at the half, and you kept your hammer down in the second half, outscoring them 15-6 to make it a 32-15 game. Really big win for Bob Chesney there. And yeah, they're certainly 1A, 1B in my opinion with Old Dominion as probably the best team in the Sun Belt East.
Sure. Because you weren't on, Matt, out sick last week, and I'm sorry I said this last week. I was the one that got you sick.
Yep, your fault.
Yep, that one was on me. So you didn't get to weigh in on this, I don't think. Who do you think is the best fit for the Southern Miss job? Or just generally, where are you looking? Because right now they have an interim 4-year assistant head coach. So staying internal for that, but I don't imagine that's where the hire is going to come from. Is it Brett Favre, as we joked about? Is it just the hottest FCS or Division II name? Have you had your thumb on this at all? What do you think makes sense?
Yeah, I've kind of looked at a couple of different opportunities. And man, the name that really jumps out to me has got to be Jimmy Rogers, who's the head coach at South Dakota State. Has been a really good program in the FCS the last couple of years, competing with their Dakota counterpart in North Dakota State. And look, if you look at the database, he's only making $310,000. Southern Miss could double that, if not triple it.
Sure.
And really probably save them a little bit of money compared to what they're paying Will Hall. And really give them an opportunity to start fresh with a young mind. And I like him. I know I've heard a couple people say Patrick Toney, who used to be the defensive coordinator at Louisiana, was the defensive coordinator with Billy Napier over at Florida, and he's now the defensive backs coach for the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay.
I know he's been waiting for a head coaching opportunity, so maybe this could be an interesting one for him to take a look at. There's a couple options out there. I've even heard some people say Brian Harsin, the former head coach at Auburn, who was at Boise before that.
Sure.
So look, Southern Miss definitely has their options. It's just going to come down to fit and how much money they're willing to pay to get one.
Yeah. I think Jimmy Rogers at South Dakota, as you said, is an interesting name. Something, because that has long been one of the premier FCS programs.
Correct.
Something interesting about that job is that the guy that preceded Jimmy Rogers, Stagelmeyer, I think his name was, he was there for 20-something years, and no one really got hired out of that South Dakota State job. But now, again, Rogers, I think this is year 2 or year 3 for him, so it wouldn't be shocking if he got that opportunity to move on. That wraps up that game. Move over to, I think, probably a bigger upset, because, again, Old Dominion just always has some magic. The bigger upset of the week, ULM at USA. South Alabama beats ULM 46-17. What's the temperature? Because, Matt, you're in these Louisiana communities. Are people hitting the panic button? Is it all over? Or what's the temperature? What's the temperature?
Well, because here's the thing. If ULM loses out and goes 5-7, that's still an accomplishment.
Oh yeah.
Right? Now there's going to be those people that are like, oh man, we were 5-2. How do we end up 5-7? And those people are right. I think as a coaching staff, if that were to happen, you have to look at it and go, okay, we went 5-1 in the first half. Very similar to what Georgia State did last year, right?
Yeah.
You started off really hot and then you fell apart. And so you would have to have a conversation about why that happened. But compared to recent years in Monroe, 5 wins would be a huge step in the right direction. But no, I don't think that this is a reason to panic. I'm charting this up to a typical Saturday in the Sun Belt.
Sure.
this can always happen, right? We've seen it happen plenty of times before. Exhibit A, a game we talked about earlier with Old Dominion and Georgia Southern. If they played
Mm-hmm.
each other again in 2 weeks, Georgia Southern might win that game by 28.
Right.
You just never know. I thought South Alabama played really well, especially in that third quarter, scoring 20 straight points. They showcased what they're able to do. They showed people that maybe that they're not a terrible team, like some people might have thought after the rough start that they had. Um, and now it sets up something incredibly interesting because Louisiana stands by themselves in the Sun Belt West.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's 3 teams under them now: ULM, South Alabama, and Arkansas State, that are all 3-1.
Right.
And then you have Texas State, who is 2-1.
Sure.
And I know we're obviously going to get into this game in a minute, Louisiana and Texas State on Tuesday night. If Texas State finds a way to win that game at home in San Marcos,
Mm-hmm.
there's a 5-way tie for first place in the Sun Belt West. That's insane.
Yeah, it feels like the old, not, I wouldn't even call it old, but within the past 10 years, the NBA balance,
Yeah,
where there are good teams out in the East, and with the Cavs or the Celtics or whoever it was 6-7 years ago, there was always like a couple teams that were worth their money, but beyond that it was all junk. And then you
correct.
had the Warriors, the Rockets, the Thunder. Like, you had all those teams that could compete. That's how the Sun Belt feels right now. And
Certainly.
that's kind of how it's been the past couple years. Rough shakens in the East. Yeah. General Booty officially out for the year, is my understanding. So it's going to be Aiden Armenta. He was 11 for 23 here. They just couldn't really get going through the air. Ahmad Hardy, 20 for 104 yards on the ground. That was working. But it was South Alabama just running all over. Kentrell Bullock, 141. Fluff Bothwell, 119. And Gio Lopez, he's really cooled off. Up
Yeah.
until the past 3 weeks, he would have been my pick for freshman of the year. It's not, that would now be Colton Joseph if I had a vote. But Gio Lopez, like I said, he's cooled off. He was 18 for 30, 168 yards in this game. ULM 3-1, as Matt said. South Al also 3-1, so they're in a really interesting race there. Last game from last week, it's Arkansas State beats Troy, but not by as much as I had anticipated. Arkansas State wins by 3, 34-31.
Look, I got to watch a little bit of this game,
Mm-hmm.
and what stood out to me was that Arkansas State did everything right in the first half. Went into the locker room up 3 scores, did exactly what you were supposed to do, right? And then in that third quarter, you came out and you let your guard down.
Mm-hmm.
And Troy took advantage of that. They were able to get some offense going. Matthew Caldwell with a pair of touchdown passes. And the thing that stood out is that they were really able to effectively move the ball. That first touchdown drive was a 75-yard drive, 53-yard drive. Get the turnover and turn it into points with a 3-play, 27-yard drive late in the quarter. And so, look, I think if you take away that one quarter from Arkansas State, I think they played really well. But that third quarter almost proved to be costly.
Right.
Because Troy kept it a lot closer, like you said, than most people probably anticipated. I thought Jalen Rayner did a nice job, 25 of 40 for 350. Added 71 yards on the ground, was Arkansas State's leading rusher. I thought Corey Rucker had a fantastic game, 193 yards on 12 catches. This was a good win for Arkansas State. They had to survive a little bit. But what you did with the win is you kept yourself in that first place position, or that second place position, I should say, in the Sun Belt West. You kept your name in the hunt. And for a team like them that has kind of struggled, like we've documented so many times
Mm-hmm.
on this podcast, 5-3 is a good place to be for them right now as they head into the month of November.
Yeah. And good for Troy. Their only win, obviously, this year was the FCS game against Florida A&M.
Yeah.
I think it was earlier this year. So I thought we got a lot more fight out of that team than we have in recent weeks. The South Alabama game was not pretty. The Texas State game was not pretty. They played a classic Troy game against ULM earlier this year. That also wasn't really pretty. So it seems like at the very least, this team is pulling the right direction, pulling the same direction at the very least. Because this is not a fight that we've seen from Troy teams in recent weeks.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to say.
And
The line was 7.5. Arkansas State. Matt and I, or Brian and I, I'm sorry, had both picked Arkansas State to cover that, which they didn't.
Which they didn't.
Yeah. So Arkansas State 3-1. They're 5-3 overall, tied in that three-way tie for second. Troy, they're 1-7, 0-4. They joined Southern Miss and Georgia State as the only teams to not win a conference game this year. We'll roll into this upcoming week of games, starting with a game that is tomorrow. And this is your game. Before we get there, though, I want to say thanks to everyone watching on Twitter, X, and YouTube. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'd be happy to respond to them, engage with you guys. Matt, tell me about this UL game on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I've said for a while that this looks like it could be the game of the year for the Cajuns in the Sun Belt. This is the game that likely decides the Western Conference or the Western Division, I should say, in my opinion. Look, I think if you're the Cajuns, I think it's just to kind of limit what Jordan McLeod and company are able to do offensively. Ishmael Mahdi has been impressive this year. Obviously, Jordan McLeod closing in on 1,900 yards passing. That's their bread and butter, right? They're going to put up points. The over-under is 65.5 for a reason. Try to slow them down, limit them to, if you can hold Texas State to 24, I think that's a win, right? Because vice versa, I think that Louisiana's offense is going to be able to put up points against Texas State's defense. Now, Texas State's defense has gotten better as the season's gone on. I still don't think that they're very good. So I think it's one of those things where they could exploit some weaknesses on that Texas State defense and put some points on the board. But the X factor here that I don't think a lot of people are talking about is this is arguably one of the biggest home games the Texas State has ever hosted. It's a midweek game, national TV, a lot on the line for them. I think that place is just going to be absolutely rocking. Look, it's going to be a tough environment, and the Cajuns are going to have to grow up a little bit. This is going to be a tough test for them, and they're going to have to figure out a way to kind of combat that environment and come out with a big win, because if they can get this win and stay undefeated in the Sun Belt, they're in the driver's seat with probably their easiest stretch to go the rest of the way. Because, Arkansas State, they're a good team, but you're at home. You're at home against South. You're at home against Troy. And then you go on the road to finish up with ULM. So if you could carry some momentum into the second mini bye, you don't play again till the 9th. So if you can carry some momentum into this mini bye, I think that's huge for the Cajuns going into their final month of the season.
Yeah. And they're in a really good position because as the only undefeated conference team, not just in the West, but in the conference as a whole, they can drop this one. And especially with the game against ULM later this year,
Yeah.
they're still in the hunt. Matt, who do you have here? The spread is Texas State by 3.5, over under 58.5. What do you like?
I'm going to take the Cajuns straight up.
Okay.
I think that they've played really well as of late. I think they figured some things out. Um, to me, I think the game against Coastal was probably their best performance of the season. Ben Wooldridge was phenomenal, 373 yards. Bill Davis went over the century mark. Terrence Carter has really come alive. He's been the leading receiver in 4 of the last 5 games. I really like the Cajuns in this one.
Yeah. I again, much like a really bad ex-girlfriend, I'm gonna keep coming back to them. Give me Texas State here.
Good God, you haven't learned your lesson?
I have, and
Are you sure?
I again, like a bad ex-girlfriend, they just need to keep burning me. I'll learn eventually. Give me Texas State minus 7.5. I like them in San Marcos. That atmosphere has been different from what I understand than it's been in years past. Bobcat Stadium's been relatively dead, not unlike Center Park, formerly Turner Field at Georgia State. But I understand that there's some momentum there, that people are showing out to games louder and with more pride than they have in recent
Yep.
years. And I think that gives them the edge. We go to Friday, another irregularly scheduled game. This one is irregularly scheduled not because it's an important match, but because it actually UConn's pretty good these days. Georgia State at UConn, 7 o'clock. UConn 7.5 point favorites, over under 48.5. I'll save us both some time. UConn's a team on the upward.
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree.
I mean, do they join the American next year? Is that how it's going down?
I
Uh,
believe you're right.
because they're independent right now. It's a weird thing where they and UConn and UMass are in the American, or are independent, while Army and Navy are in the American. And I really think you ought to just flip those two, let the academies remain independent, put UMass and UConn in the American. But I think they're going there anyway. I'll save you the trouble. Georgia State's not going to win this. Not on the road. I I think the reaction on Georgia State Twitter after the loss to Old Dominion was very much like, "Oh my gosh, I'm never drinking the Kool-Aid on this again." So there is a bit of like fan hangover from the Vanderbilt win, but I've been very clear on my stance about that game from the start, that was as fluky as it gets. Um, so I'm not going to put too much stock into that. Give me UConn minus 7.5.
Yeah, I'll do the same. They've been playing really well as of late. I really like their running game with Darrell Robinson. Skylar Bell's been a nice receiver as well. And look, I think they've got some gutsy wins this season. They fought hard against Wake Forest, uh, fought hard against Duke. I like the Huskies.
Yeah. Then we rolled to Saturday. We finally got, well, actually, we had this last week as well, after a couple weeks of just poor scheduling. A good slate of spread out games, starting with Old Dominion at App on ESPN Plus. 2:30 kickoff. Old Dominion are 2.5 point favorites. Over under is 60.5. Give me the under. I don't know where these points are coming from. And again, I don't know how many times Old Dominion is just going to have to keep putting up 35 points against good teams. But I refuse to believe in that offense. I think Colton Joseph is good, if not great, but I don't think the weapons around him are good enough. Fluff Bothwell, and I think Contrell Bullock was the other one that ran amok last week. I think they just feasted on a really bad Georgia State team.
Yeah, I'm gonna take App State here at home. I think they got a lot of momentum from that win over Georgia State, and again, after everything they've been through, being back at home again for the second week in a row, like you said, Old Dominion's offense can be a little inconsistent. So I'm awaiting a letdown. from them on Saturday, so I'll take the Mountaineers at home.
Okay. Put that in our sheet. We then roll into a 3:30 kick. So right as that game is kind of hitting the Old Dominion game is hitting the back end of the first half. At 3:30, we will get ULM at Marshall. Marshall are 10.5 point favorites, 47.5 over under. Again, this one feels easy. Give me ULM.
Yeah, that's a 10.5 is crazy. AJ Turner's been really good for Marshall, but they've got quarterback questions because I don't think Charles Huff can decide who he wants to play at quarterback between Stone Earl and Braylon Braxton.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, I wouldn't be surprised if Marshall won this game, but I don't think it's going to be by 11 or more points. So yeah, I'll take ULM plus 10.5 as well.
Sure. We then roll real rapidly into the 4 o'clock kick. It's Coastal at Troy. Coastal 4.5 point favorites, over under 52.5. I saw Brian joke about this on the Twitter. Coastal needs an offensive coordinator. Grayson McCall is available.
Yeah, he is.
Why not bring him up for this Troy game? Give me Coastal minus 4.5. They're going to have ample opportunity to kind of play with their food in this one.
You know, they're going to have ample opportunity to play with their food, and that's why I think I'm going to take Troy.
Yeah, that's not a bad pick.
I think I'm going to take Troy. They're at home, like you said. They fought really hard against Arkansas State. I think that fight's going to give them some confidence that look, we can win games in this conference, and I think they can find a way to make things really interesting. So I'll take Troy plus 4.5.
And then we wrap up the night with the teams of, are they actually good or are they collapsing in the second half? It's Georgia Southern at South Alabama, 7:30 Eastern kick in Mobile. South Al minus 6.5, over under 59.5. I'm going to trust Southern. It ultimately decides what they do at quarterback, I think. And I frankly believe I trust them with J.C. French more than Dexter Williams, just because he's been the guy up to this point. And again, save for they had the Marshall collapse, so I'm not going to say save for the loss this past weekend, but I like Georgia Southern here. I still think they're a top 4 team in the conference, while South Al isn't quite there.
I shall take the over of 59.5. Look, both of these teams have been susceptible to scoring points and giving up points at the same time. So I think 59.5 is certainly a reachable number between these two teams.
And that wraps it up with the 2 early week games. It's a pretty dry or pretty slow Saturday, I suppose, in the Sun Belt. Matt, are there any other games, just looking across college football, that catch your eye on Saturday?
Let's see.
What's your overall game of the week?
Let's take a look at the slate, shall we?
Because obviously, Ohio State does play at Penn State.
That's going to be a good one.
That'll be a really interesting game. Florida, Georgia is this weekend.
Florida, Georgia, yeah. Look, Oregon, Michigan could be interesting. I know Michigan's struggling, but they're still it's Michigan, right? And they're in the big house. I'm still waiting for Oregon to have a slip up. So that game could be an interesting one to keep an eye on. And then
keep an eye on Texas A&M at South Carolina.
I was just getting ready to say
South
that
Carolina
was my nightcap game.
Pull something out.
Yeah, that's probably the game I'll be keeping an eye on in the nightcap. Pitt SMU top 25 matchup. That one could be interesting as well.
Yeah, and will you be going to any games this weekend?
This weekend, no. I'm on my couch. Both LSU and Louisiana aren't playing on Saturday, so it'll be a nice weekend at home. Actually, get to be a college football fan for once.
Well, welcome back, Matt. Before we go, tell them where you can find us.
You can find us on all social medias at Warm Weather Fans. You can always email us questions at warmweatherfans@gmail.com. Follow us on YouTube as well. Hit subscribe so that you can get notifications when we post our latest episodes. And you can find me personally on social media at MiguezMatt.
Yeah. You can find the show, as Matt said, on Twitter at Warm Weather Fans, where it looks like most of our folks are watching. We appreciate you all being here. This is going to be a regular thing for us. Matt, you weren't here last week, but Brian and I tried out the live stream, and I'll tell you, we've got about 115 people watching right now. I think Brian and I peaked at like maybe 12. So I appreciate
Hey, step
everyone.
in the right direction, baby.
That is a we 10 times our viewership in one night. So we really appreciate everyone coming and listening. We will be live streaming most weeks, Monday or Tuesday. We'll let you know as we iron those out. I'm also on Twitter at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo. You can also follow our co-host Brian Stone at Watch the Stone. This has been the first ever Warm Weather Fans without Brian. We thank you all so much for watching. My name is Zeke Palermo. This has been Matt Miguez, and this has been Warm Weather Fans.
Absolutely incredible. This man just got out.